I watched helplessly from my porch as flames consumed my home, each furious crackle and pop a clear message from the HOA that they'd gone too far. But they had no idea they'd just attacked the property of a feared judge who never backed down from a fight. When I bought the house at the corner of Sycamore and Brookfield, I wasn't looking for trouble. I wanted silence, a place where my career and my past could finally take a back seat to a slower, simpler life. After 3 decades serving as a federal circuit judge, presiding over mob cases, white-collar corruption trials, and everything in between, I'd grown used to masks, lies, and leverage. But I'd also grown tired. I retired quietly, packed up my law library and my old golden retriever, and settled into a quaint cul-de-sac on the edge of a community called Maple Gate Estates. At first glance, it looked like paradise. Clean sidewalks, chirping birds, families waving from porches. Nobody knew who I was. I liked it that way. I figured if I kept my head down, stayed neighborly, and paid my dues like everyone else, I'd be left in peace. That illusion lasted about 6 days. The first envelope came in the mail, no stamp, just slid into my mailbox like a threat folded in thirds. The paper was thick, the ink too dark, and the language too formal for something so ridiculous. I was being cited for having an unapproved mailbox color. Apparently, mine, a deep hunter green, was in violation of community aesthetic cohesion standards, whatever that meant. The HOA wanted it repainted standard beige by the end of the week, or I'd incur a $150 fine. I laughed, tossed the letter on the counter, and forgot about it until the next one arrived. This time, they wanted me to remove a heritage Japanese maple that had stood in the corner of my front lawn since before the neighborhood was even developed. Too close to the sidewalk, the notice claimed. Roots pose a trip hazard. The sidewalk was a full 6 feet from the trunk. It was nonsense, but the citations kept coming. One for overgrown grass, despite it being freshly mowed. Another for inadequate seasonal decoration effort, because apparently not stringing Christmas lights was now a punishable offense. Every time I thought it would stop, a new one showed up, signed with a looping signature in bold blue ink. Karen Whitmore, Ho President. I didn't know her at first, just caught glimpses. A severe-looking woman in pastel workout gear, always with a clipboard, always watching. I noticed her stopping by my house on her morning walks, squinting at my front door like it owed her something. I figured she was just a stickler. Then I caught her crouched in my flower beds with a measuring tape. That was the moment I realized it wasn't about rules. It was about control, and I was a new variable she couldn't account for. She ramped things up. Started having her cronies, 2 smug-faced board members named Doug and Marla, do inspections on their lunch breaks. They'd circle my property like sharks, jotting notes, pretending not to look directly at the security camera I'd installed above the garage. When that camera mysteriously stopped working one night, I replaced it with a better one. Motion detection, cloud uploads, night vision. I wasn't just some clueless retiree. I'd put away senators, CEOs, and a bishop once. I knew how power hid behind procedure. I documented everything. The citations became absurd. Non-regulation trash bin color, wind chimes audible from public sidewalk, failure to adequately obscure utilities. Each came with an escalating fine. I contested everyone, filed formal disputes, quoted their own bylaws back at them. I knew I was winning because the citations stopped coming in the mail and started appearing directly taped to my door, bright orange, impossible to miss, and always applied while I was out. That's when the vandalism began. It started small. My back gate left mysteriously ajar, a crack in my porch light cover that hadn't been there before. But then I woke up one morning to find my front passenger side tires slashed. The police came, filled out a report, said it was probably random vandalism. I doubted it. A week later, someone spray-painted "Lawyer Scum" across my garage door in dripping red letters. I don't talk about what happened the night after that, when I heard glass shatter downstairs and came running to find my front window broken, a chunk of landscaping rock lying on the rug, and my dog trembling beside it. The message was clear. I was being warned, but they underestimated me. I changed out every lock. I installed floodlights, cameras, and reinforced my mailbox. I began my own investigation, cross-referencing complaint patterns with HOA meeting minutes. I found that every resident who dared challenge Karen's authority about their fence height, their porch furniture, their backyard sheds, had either been fined into submission or quietly moved out. She had a pattern, a method, and she was using HOA power to intimidate and harass anyone who didn't fit her vision. I brought my findings to the next open board meeting, calmly reciting violations of HOA statutes and even local ordinances. Karen smiled through clenched teeth and suggested I take a break from worrying so much. 2 nights later, someone egged my car. The next morning, 3 of my fence boards had been ripped clean off. The police came again, useless as before, and Karen just happened to be walking her dog past my house as they filed their report. "Such a shame," she said, shaking her head. "You know, this neighborhood used to be so peaceful before all the litigation started. That was the last straw." I started collecting affidavits from neighbors, quiet ones, the kind who nodded nervously when you mentioned the HOA but refused to speak up. One elderly man whispered that he'd tried filing a complaint last year and found sugar poured into his car's gas tank the next week. Another had his backyard garden labeled a nuisance agricultural installation and bulldozed without notice. Karen's reach was long, and she wore that power like a badge. But all tyrants slip eventually. The final escalation came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when I returned from the hardware store to find my garage wide open, paint thinner splashed across the floor, and the word "Leave" scratched into the side of my workbench. No valuables were taken, nothing stolen, just a message, a statement, a dare. The fire hadn't come yet, but the fuse was lit. And what they didn't realize, what they couldn't have known, was that I was done playing defense. I'd been in enough courtrooms to know the value of patience. Retaliation, real, effective retaliation, requires control, and control starts with documentation. After the garage incident, I could have struck hard. I had enough circumstantial evidence to file a civil complaint against the HOA for harassment and property damage. But I wasn't interested in a slap fight over fines and fences. I wanted the truth to come out in a way that couldn't be spun or dismissed. So I waited, collected, prepared. I requested a formal slot on the next HOA agenda, citing Section 4.2 of the bylaws, which allowed any homeowner to speak publicly on issues affecting their property. Karen naturally delayed approval until the last possible moment, replying via email 2 hours before the meeting to say I'd have a brief window to share my concerns. That was fine. I didn't need a soapbox, just an audience. When Thursday evening arrived, I stepped into the fluorescent-lit community center carrying a manila folder thick with photos, time-stamped videos, and copies of police reports. The board sat in their usual formation, Karen dead center in her pastel blazer, flanked by Marla and Doug, who never spoke unless prompted. The room was half full, some faces I recognized from the street. Some I didn't. I waited until the open forum and then calmly approached the podium. "Over the last 6 weeks," I began, projecting my voice like I had in court, "my property has been vandalized on 4 separate occasions. Tires slashed, windows broken, spray paint, intimidation. I've filed reports with the local police. Here are copies." I passed the stack to Karen, who didn't even glance down. Additionally, my security footage has captured individuals, identifiable individuals, trespassing and inspecting my property without consent, including members of this board. Murmurs swept through the room. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to ask the board formally to investigate these incidents and address what appears to be a pattern of targeted harassment. Karen leaned forward with a smile that made my skin crawl. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Whitaker, she said, voice syrupy. We're all very concerned about crime. But I'd like to remind the community that sometimes stress can cause us to see patterns where none exist. And as we all know, Mr. Prosix Whitaker recently retired from a very high-pressure career. A few heads turned toward me with uncertainty. I also want to clarify, Karen continued, that security footage collected on private property is inadmissible in HOA proceedings without consent. That wasn't even close to true, but I bit my tongue. And that, unfortunately, we have no control over what local teenagers might be up to on a Friday night. The implication landed hard. Paranoid retiree inventing boogeymen. I saw it in their eyes. She'd shifted the narrative in under a minute. Some neighbors looked at me with sympathy, others with doubt. I stepped away from the podium without another word, reminding myself not to fight her in the court of public opinion. The real court would come later. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Every notice taped to my door, every car that lingered too long in front of my house, every offhand comment from Marla about just wanting to keep things nice. I upgraded my home surveillance system, 12 new cameras with cloud backup, motion detection, and a 150-degree field of view. I filed a public records request for all HOA citations issued in the past year and began comparing the timing of my notices against known board meetings. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every time I challenged a citation, a new one appeared within 3 days. My mailbox had become a daily exercise in restraint. I reported each new incident to the police. They grew more attentive with each report, especially after I mentioned my former judicial credentials in passing. I made sure to email Karen each time I filed. Short, polite, to the point. Dear Miss Whitmore, this is to inform you that another incident has been reported to the local authorities and is being documented in accordance with standard legal procedure. Thank you. It wasn't a threat. It was a ledger, a record. A noose tightening slowly by the book. The citations, meanwhile, grew increasingly absurd. One accused me of creating a visual obstruction by hanging wind chimes on my back porch. Another claimed my recycling bin had been improperly stored, despite being exactly where the HOA regulations required. My favorite was the one that said my fence posed a potential threat to neighborhood children because of its unwelcoming coloration. The fence was white, the same white it had been when I bought the property. I wrote back to that one in particular. Dear HOA Board, I find it deeply troubling that you've chosen to allege a safety risk regarding the color of my fence. There is no code, regulation, or scientific basis for this assertion. Please be advised that if these false claims continue, I will be forced to pursue legal remedies. Sincerely, Judge R. Whitaker, Rhett. That signature, the title I hadn't yet used, was my first warning shot. I kept my tone civil, my language measured, but that line? That was a shot across Karen's manicured bow. The response came not by letter, but in person. Karen appeared on my lawn the following afternoon with Doug in tow, holding another citation. You're violating height regulations, she said, gesturing to the hydrangea bush beside my porch. It exceeds 42 inches. That's a hazard. It's 38, I replied, holding up a measuring tape. I've trimmed it twice this month. Karen ignored the tape. We've received complaints. From whom? I asked. Anonymous sources. That won't hold up, I said. She smirked. It doesn't have to. Not in HOA hearings. No, I replied. But in a deposition it does. That wiped the smirk off her face. Doug shifted uncomfortably. Are you threatening legal action? Not yet, I said, stepping closer. But I'm warning you, if this board continues to target my property with fabricated claims and retaliatory action, I will pursue injunctive relief. I'll subpoena every document, every board email, and every financial transaction you've processed. I'll file for discovery so fast your lawyer won't have time to invoice you. And I promise you, Ms. Whitmore, I've got more patience than you have petty citations. She said nothing, just turned and walked back to the sidewalk, Doug trailing behind her like a kicked dog. I watched them go. Didn't move. Just stood there. Let them feel my silence. I knew they'd come again. Bullies don't back off after one loss, but they'd think harder next time. Because for the first time in her life, Karen was up against someone who wasn't afraid of her gavel. It happened the one weekend I wasn't home. I'd accepted an invitation to speak at a judicial ethics conference 3 states over, a rare request I couldn't turn down. 3 days in a sterile hotel ballroom talking precedent and procedure with federal peers. I left Friday morning with a suitcase, a speech, and a lingering sense of unease I couldn't shake. Before leaving, I double-checked my locks, armed the security system, and informed the local police of my absence. A habit from years of dealing with high-profile defendants who didn't like verdicts going against them. I even had my neighbor Ed from 2 houses down keeping an eye on things, though Ed was more bourbon than backbone. When I landed back home on Sunday evening, my phone had already buzzed 6 times in the span of 10 minutes. The first was a voicemail from Ed, his voice cracked and trembling. Your house. Jesus. Judge. Call me. There was a fire. The next was from the local police department, followed by an email from the HOA subject line. Incident report, 14 Sycamore Lane. My stomach dropped. As I pulled onto my street, I could smell the scorched wood before I even saw the wreckage. Smoke still hung in the air like a ghost that hadn't decided to leave yet. My porch was gone. My garage doors were warped inward like they'd been sucked into hell itself. The upper floor had collapsed partially onto the first. Fire crews had taped off the property and scattered cones across the lawn, now a graveyard of ash and broken siding. My knees nearly buckled at the sight of it. This wasn't an accident. This was a statement. I walked the perimeter slowly, eyes scanning for anything salvageable. The arson investigator on site gave me a tight-lipped summary. Fire started at the back of the house, just after midnight on Saturday. No signs of a lightning strike. No electrical short. Accelerant likely involved. You got enemies? He asked, squinting at me. Only the kind who wear khakis and carry clipboards, I muttered. But my voice caught in my throat as I rounded the back and saw the scorched remnants of my study, the room where I kept my grandfather's legal books, the wood-paneled sanctuary where I drafted the decisions that made my name. It was all gone. And yet, like a miracle in the middle of the storm, the black steel box bolted beneath the floorboards of my office closet still stood, charred on the outside but intact. The fireproof safe I'd installed when I bought the home. I dropped to my knees and unlatched it with trembling fingers. Inside were the documents that would change everything. Court orders, hard drive backups, HOA financial disclosures I'd been collecting for months, surveillance photos, correspondence between board members that a whistleblowing neighbor had anonymously slid under my door weeks prior. They'd survived. Everything else had burned, but the evidence remained. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the lid and stood back up. Karen called it an unfortunate incident. That was the word she used in the email she sent to the entire community, CCing the police, the insurance adjuster, and the HOA lawyer, of course. We at the board are saddened by the unfortunate incident at 14 Sycamore and hope that Mr. Whitaker recovers quickly. Our records show he was recently cautioned about improper storage of paint thinner near external HVAC units. While we cannot confirm any connection, this serves as a vital reminder for all homeowners to adhere to safety guidelines. I read the message twice before slamming my laptop closed. She was insinuating that I did it, that I burned my own house down. Karen and her inner circle began casually floating the theory to anyone who'd listen that I was a retired judge obsessed with lawsuits, looking for a reason to take down the HOA. That maybe I'd lost my mind, that the stress had finally caught up with me. A few neighbors whispered it over fences. Others brought casseroles to my temporary rental and avoided eye contact. I saw the fear in their faces, not of me, of her, of what would happen to them if they spoke up, of being fined into oblivion or suddenly targeted for safety violations. Most people just wanted to keep their lawns mowed and their cars garaged without becoming collateral damage. I understood that. I didn't fault them, but I also didn't need them, because Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that I wasn't just some crank with a gavel and a retirement fund. She didn't know that before I stepped down, I'd been one of the most feared names in judicial oversight. That my courtroom had hosted billion-dollar corporations, state senators, and 3 different federal agencies, all scrambling to plea out before I ruled. She didn't know that I'd once exposed a real estate syndicate laundering foreign capital through rural development grants, and that I'd personally put 2 of its board members in federal prison. She didn't know that I still had the numbers of prosecutors, auditors, and forensic analysts who owed me favors and respected my calls more than they respected their own superiors. She didn't know that I'd been keeping tabs on her HOA's financial trail for months, not just the public books, but the shadow documents, the LLCs buried under landscaping contracts, the suspicious loans taken out in the name of emergency renovations that never seemed to break ground. She had no idea I'd subpoenaed my own home insurance company to retrieve unredacted fire assessment reports after her little narrative reached the adjuster's office, or that I'd already begun compiling a comprehensive timeline of every fine, every meeting, every falsified citation with digital metadata to match. While Karen smiled in press photos next to flower beds and fundraisers, I was already outlining depositions. She thought I was vulnerable, that I'd retreat into silence and scorch marks. But I was just getting started. You see, Karen didn't understand the difference between a threat and a consequence. A threat is a warning. A consequence is the follow-through. She'd played this game with ordinary people before, scaring them into submission, pushing just hard enough to make them move or surrender. But she'd lit a match in the wrong courtroom this time. She didn't know I'd already sent certified letters to the state attorney general's office and the IRS flagging the HOA for suspected fraud and abuse of power. She didn't know I'd handed off digital copies of the financials to a friend at the Department of Housing and Urban Development who'd been hungry for a low-hanging corruption case with a media-ready villain. She didn't know that the only thing stronger than my anger was my patience. And while she spun tales in board meetings and curated her little empire of fear, I was calmly, meticulously assembling a bomb that would detonate under the entire foundation she'd built, not with explosives, with subpoenas, with discovery requests, with evidence and statutes and a courtroom full of records that wouldn't burn no matter how many matches she lit. And when it all came crashing down, when the TV crews swarmed her manicured driveway and the handcuffs closed on her manicured wrists, I wouldn't say a word. I'd just watch. Because the fire she lit wasn't the first I'd walk through, but it would be the last she ever started. Justice, unlike vengeance, doesn't arrive with rage. It arrives with silence, with order, with paperwork filed in triplicate and signatures that bleed accountability. By the time Karen realized the tide was shifting, the current was already dragging her out to sea. I moved methodically, beginning with a discreet call to an old friend at the Department of Justice. Public corruption case, local jurisdiction, HOA using community power for personal gain. I didn't need to embellish. I let the facts do the talking. Within a week, I'd compiled a digital dossier so dense it crashed a paralegal's laptop. Every fake violation, every payment routed through shell landscaping companies, every coerced homeowner who'd sold under pressure, it was all there. Karen and her cronies hadn't just overstepped, they'd industrialized their abuse, creating a small empire of intimidation disguised as neighborhood beautification. I leveraged my connections carefully. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wanted thoroughness, the kind of case that sticks. The FBI got involved next, quietly at first. Subpoenas were issued under seal. Surveillance was authorized. For the first time, it wasn't my property under watch. It was theirs. Investigators traced fraudulent billing to multiple board members, inflated maintenance contracts paid to family-owned businesses, reserve funds rerouted into private investment portfolios, and suspicious withdrawals around the same dates as neighborhood renovations that never occurred. It unraveled faster than even I expected. The kicker came when one brave neighbor, a single mother named Brianna, came forward with a signed document Karen had once forced her to sign under duress. A fake noise complaint used to justify an eviction notice. She said if I didn't sign it, Brianna whispered through tears during her interview with the feds, she'd report me for daycare violations. I wasn't even running a daycare. She made it up. More came after her, dozens. People who'd been too afraid to speak now lined up to testify, emboldened by the realization that Karen wasn't untouchable. The community that once tiptoed past her began to push back, collectively unburying a history of bullying and silenced voices. On a crisp fall morning, federal agents arrived in unmarked SUVs, flanked by local police, and raided the Maplegate HOA office. The same room where Karen once mocked my conspiracy theories was now cordoned off with crime scene tape. Karen wasn't home. She was hosting a brunch when they picked her up, bragging about a big announcement she'd be making at the next HOA meeting. The cuffs were a surprise. Her mugshot ran in the local paper beside a quote she'd once given to a gardening blog. "Power is the reward for order." That line aged like milk. The trial was swift. Federal court. Multiple charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement of community funds, obstruction of justice, and, my personal favorite, racketeering. Her defense leaned hard into victimhood. Her lawyer, a greasy man with more gel than credibility, called her a pillar of the community who had simply become overwhelmed by the scale of her responsibilities. She claimed the fines were standard, that she trusted her treasurer, and most insultingly, that she had no knowledge of any fire. That lie didn't last long. The fire department's report, the accelerant traces and surveillance footage of HOA board member Doug at a nearby gas station hours before the fire all painted a different picture. The nail in the coffin was a single email recovered from the HOA's internal servers. "Whitaker is bluffing. He's all bark. A little scare might shut him up." The timestamp matched the night of the fire. It bore Karen's digital signature. The jury didn't take long. Guilty, on all counts. The judge, a former colleague of mine, recused himself before the trial even began. "I'm too close," he'd said with a smile. "But I hope she rots." She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for the first 7. Restitution was ordered. Over $2 million to be repaid to homeowners she had defrauded, intimidated, or unlawfully fined. Several board members took plea deals. Some wept in court. Doug didn't. He just stared blankly, like he still didn't understand how it all fell apart. After the sentencing, I declined interviews. Reporters showed up at my rental home. Camera crews rolled past the ruins of my former house, and the HOA subreddit lit up with conspiracy theories about the judge who brought down Karen. I ignored it all. Justice didn't need my commentary, but the neighborhood did. With Karen gone and the old board dissolved by court order, I helped organize a new one, not to lead it, but to shape it. We rewrote the bylaws, established term limits, enforced transparency rules that required public audits and open meeting records. No more anonymous complaints, no more unchecked power. We installed a neighborhood ethics committee, mostly made up of retired teachers and veterans, people with real backbone, not just ambition. I refused the presidency, though they asked twice. "I've already done my time on the bench," I said. "Now I just want my porch swing back." And I got it. 6 months later, I moved back onto Sycamore Lane. The new house wasn't as big, but it was mine. My new mailbox was the same green as the old one, freshly repainted. Nobody said a word. The biggest poetic justice came one sunny afternoon in April, when a moving van pulled into Karen's former driveway. I watched from my porch as volunteers unloaded desks, bookshelves, and bright-colored beanbags. A local children's charity had purchased the home at auction, using restitution funds earmarked for community improvement. The house now served as the Maplegate Youth Education Center, offering free tutoring, civic education classes, and after-school snacks to kids from all over the district. The first sign they hung above the door read, "Justice grows here." I didn't put it there, but I won't pretend I didn't smile when I saw it. Peace returned to the neighborhood slowly, but it came. Residents began speaking to each other again, not just about grass height or pet leashes, but about barbecues and kids' soccer games and holiday lights. The fear had lifted. The threat was gone. People who'd once cowered behind hedges now stood proudly on their porches, waving as I walked by. Some would nod and say thank you quietly. I always just nodded back. I didn't need praise. I didn't need a statue. I just needed a place to sit, a cold glass of iced tea, and the soft creak of a porch swing under an honest sky. And in the end, that's what I got. Because justice, real justice, isn't loud. It doesn't knock on your door in the middle of the night or hide behind fake fines and broken windows. It walks through the front gate, stands in broad daylight, and says, "I'm still here. You can't scare me off. You never could."